Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So today we're going to be having a look at a tool called Pulumi. It's an infrastructure as code tool, an alternative to something like Terraform. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing and let's get right into it. So Pulumi itself is an open source tool written in Go. And again, the premise of it is you're writing infrastructure as code, but now you can kind of build it within an ecosystem that you're already kind of comfortable with, right? So we've got, TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, Go, C#. So the packages, dependencies, build tools, just the general ecosystem that you're already familiar with, you can kind of use that to build this infrastructure, which is quite kind of a powerful thing. So let's dive in and see how it works. So I'm starting off with an empty directory here, and before you start, you're going to have to set up two things. So the first thing is you need to install the Pulumi CLI. If we just hit into get started here, let's pick a provider as well. So let's go to AWS and just go to before you begin. So installing the Pulumi CLI. So I'm on Mac, I've run brew install Pulumi. You need to set up your Node.js or whatever environment that you're using, and then you need to, of course, configure your provider. So that's kind of steps you need to do before you get started. So I've already got all that set up. I've got AWS set up, and I've installed Pulumi, and I've already got Node.js set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Pulumi new command. So Pulumi new, and I'm going to pass it the basically the template that I want to use, which is a combination of the provider and the language. So AWS and TypeScript. So if I hit enter there, this is basically going to ask me a few kind of details, the name, the description, which I'm not really too bothered about. And then it's going to ask me about the stack name. And we'll go over what stack is in just a moment once we have initialized this. So I'm just going to hit enter here. And it's going to ask me about the AWS region, because I've selected AWS. So I'm just going to do EU West. Let's go for EU West 2. I think that's the one there. Cool. So I'll give that a few seconds to set up. So that's finished running. The reason that took a while is running an npm install. So you can see this added the node modules here, and it's added a bunch of files. So let's have a quick look at the directory structure. Mainly you've got your index.ts, and this is where all the code is going to go for basically all your infrastructure, or the starting point anyways. Standard package and package lock JSONs. And then we have tsconfig because it's in TypeScript, and then we have a couple of Pulumi files. So the main concepts of Pulumi in terms of kind of structure, you have projects and you have stacks. So a project is kind of the overarching concept in terms of your directory. So any directory with a pulumi.yaml is a project, basically, right? So just like this is a JavaScript project because it has a, or a Node.js project, should I say, because it has a package JSON. It's also a Pulumi project because it has a pulumi.yaml. And this basically just, it's got the name, description, it's got some metadata basically on the runtime here. The next concept is stacks, and I won't go too much into detail because this is kind of an introduction session. But all you need to know about stacks is each stack basically represents a different environment. So the current stack I'm in, if I can use the Pulumi command line to check. So if I do Pulumi stack here, I should be able to see. There we go. That the current stack is dev. So I'm in the dev stack, and it basically represents environments, or so they say in the documentation. So Pulumi.dev.yaml, this dev represents the stack that I'm in, and within this file I can add basically different configurations or variables, and then I can access those variables while I'm doing infrastructure, and different environments will have different variables, and that's basically how you run different environments. So now I'm on dev, I can run it with EU West with size of the machines, T2.micro, etc. And then from my staging or production environment, I might have different sizes, different configurations. So if I want to run something slightly different in different environments, I would just change the stack and deploy my basically deploy the infrastructure to that stack. Cool. So let's remove this. The only configuration I need is AWS region, and everything else here is fine as is. So now we jump over to the index.ts file. So you'll see here, basically they already have a few imports and they basically already create a bit of infrastructure for you. So I'm going to click on my S3 console over here. I'm on the kind of the bucket page. You can see I don't have any S3 buckets. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through an example of running this. We'll add a bit of infrastructure just to see what the changes looks like. And then we'll destroy it all. And hopefully that will basically give you a good understanding of how Pulumi works. So we can see here that we're importing from one of Pulumi's packages, in this case the AWS one. We can see that this is kind of the syntax. They have a bunch of objects with parameters, and they basically represent resources in the provider. So in this case, we're creating a new S3 bucket called my bucket, and then what we're doing here is we're exporting the name. And when we export the name, Pulumi recognizes that as an output, which means you can then use that output elsewhere. You can access it. So Let's just keep this as is for now. And what we'll do is we're going to run over to the command line and we're going to do Pulumi up, right? So Pulumi up is the command that basically says, hey, I want to spin up the infrastructure that I've declaratively written in the code here. And you'll see this link here kicking around, and I have not mentioned too much, but the very first time you run this, it's going to ask you to basically create an account and log in to Pulumi. And this is basically how it manages the state. So if you're familiar with Terraform, the TF state file, Pulumi's got something similar. It manages the state. That's how it knows which infrastructure that you've created before. So you can see they've not added any state to the directory straight away here. It is stored somewhere. Where's that stored? Well, it's stored remotely as part of this kind of Pulumi app. So if we just open this up a bit and we run into, well, let's go to Pulumi tutorial. So when we created that, it created this project within the app. And then within the project, I can see all my stacks. So this is the dev stack, which is the default one. So if I click into the dev stack, in here, in theory, I'd be able to see all the information about this stack itself. You saw that link there. That took me to kind of the activity. So that's what's going on here. That it's got details about the Git repository, etc. And when I ran Pulumi up, you can see here at the bottom it says, hey, do you want to perform this update? You can see what's going on here. We want to add basically two resources. One of them is a Pulumi resource. It's a Pulumi kind of a stack. And the second one is an AWS resource, which is the AWS bucket here. And here's the name, so it's got a bit of metadata there. And we can basically provide more details, or we can just say, hey, yeah, go ahead and update that. So I'm just going to hit yes, and we'll just give that a few seconds to basically go ahead and create. Cool. So now that that's done, you can see here straight away the outputs. So we've got an output of bucket name, which is one of the constants that we're exporting, and we've got the bucket ID basically, or the bucket name right there. So if I head over to the S3 management console and I refresh this guy here, we should see basically that bucket name and that bucket. And there we go. So we can see that there's a matching, basically matching names there. And if I also head over to the app, because like I said, the state is captured here, we can head over to something like the resources here, and we can see all the resources that this, the state contains. So we can see the Pulumi or the provider here, and we can see the AWS S3 bucket. This actually gives you a link, which is convenient to open it directly. And they've got a nice graph view. So as your, I guess, infrastructure grows, you can kind of see the connections. Might be useful, might not be. Right now, we've just got one thing. Sometimes if you create a resource, it might create kind of multiple resources behind the scenes. You'd be able to see the connections here. And I think that's pretty much everything. If you ever deal with, secrets, configuration tags, etc., it's all, you can see it's all provided here. So you can see our configuration. But other than that, it's just a nice visualization for things there. So let's pop this back here and move on. So next up, let's add another resource. So we'll add an EC2 instance, and then we'll basically have a quick look at how flexible it can be, because we're in kind of the JavaScript or TypeScript ecosystem, and we'll call it there. So I've got some code here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an AMI. So when you create an EC2 instance, you need to tell it which AMI to use. And again, there's an API for all of these. So here I'm using AWS EC2 get AMI function. So they have some functions, again, all in the documentation. And in that function, very similar to kind of data blocks within Terraform, you can pass in filters. So in this case, I'm saying filter by name, and I'm looking for basically this value. Owners, so this is Amazon owner, and you can just say most recent true. So just take the most recent one. And that gives you an AMI. So this function here returns a promise. It's going out and actually requesting data and figuring things out. So Pulumi have basically provided a convenience function called Pulumi.output, which is basically a wrapper to basically expand or resolve that promise and bring you back the data. So now for the server, when I'm creating that, I can actually just access the AMI directly. I don't need to kind of await anything because it's already been resolved. So if I go ahead and create my server in this case, again, another resource, another object from the API. So it's an EC2 instance. I give it a name in this case, and then there are a bunch of arguments that I can provide. In this case, I'm just going to provide an instance type, T2 micro, and an AMI. And you can see here the AMI is referencing this other object that I already created, and there's a bunch of outputs. So again, because it's AMI, I should be able to get a bunch of IntelliSense, and here's all the outputs that it provides. So AMI, ID, etc. So once we've got that, now we can export. In this case, I'm just going to export the public IP address from server.public IP address. Public IP, sorry. And again, I can export whatever you need basically, and that's just going to be added to my output. So if I go down here and I run Pulumi up again, what we should basically see is that it's going to be creating basically the new resources. We'll just leave that for a second to run. And there we go. We can see we've got new resources. It's not updating the existing one. So again, I'm just going to go over to yes, update that, and see how that goes. So while that's doing that, in the background, what I want to show you is basically the flexibility that we have here. So again, because this is all in code, right there we've created one server, but we can basically use the code to our advantage, right? So I can go ahead and I can create a map of IDs or whatever it is, and I can map that, for example, to different resources. So I can say map these IDs just like this, and then I can take this new instance, paste it in here, and I might say something like server, and just interpolate that with the ID there. So let me just remove this server here. So I'm mapping over a list. Imagine this is an input for somewhere, or I've got some logic or functions or whatever it is. And because I'm mapping that, I can export that to servers. And here, the public IPs, I can basically map over, I think I can map over the servers and just do server, and I guess we can just server output the server dot, what was it? Or I guess in this case, I'm just going to do server.ids. And oh yeah, in this case, I need to be returning the resource. So let's just pop this out here. So if I'm returning that resource, then here, again, still got IntelliSense, so I can pick whatever I want to do. And if I run a Pulumi up this time, we're going to see that there's going to be some changes. We'll let that run for a moment. There we go. And we can see that, hey, it's deleting the sum server. It's creating the 3 servers that I have there, 1, 2, 3, and it's going to have the outputs of all the public IPs from those servers. So you can see how this starts to get quite powerful, and it's just an easier concept to grasp because it's in TypeScript. It's something that we kind of, in a language that we understand and know quite well. So it's easy to kind of modularize, turn things into functions, and it's just generally quite flexible. So I'm going to undo some of these changes here, and let's just double check in the S3 console that our EC2 instance was created properly, just to make sure that everything's all right. Instance is running, yeah, so we've got one instance running there, and we can see that, yeah, so T2 micro, so everything is running there fine. And the final thing that we want to do, so we've created some resources, we could have updated some resources, and I'm just going to actually hit no here. The final thing that we do want to do here is I'm just going to do a Pulumi destroy. So as well as creating everything, we can also destroy, if I can spell that, destroy everything too. So I'm going to run a Pulumi destroy here, and what that should do is basically take all our existing resources. In this case, we have 3. We have the Pulumi stack itself, which lives within Pulumi, and then the 2 AWS resources. And it basically says, are you sure you want to do that? So I'm going to hit yes here and just give it a few seconds, and that should basically remove everything. And there we go. The resources have been removed. So if I guess refresh this page here, with my instances, I should see nothing there, and I think we can assume that the S3 bucket is also removed. And if I head over to the app over here, let me just expand that again, and I just hit into resources, we can see there's no resources. So everything's removed. The stack and the project still exist. They're still there. We can remove them separately, but all the resources within them are removed. Great. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial. So Pulumi is looking like a great alternative to Terraform. Again, the biggest advantage is it's an ecosystem that we understand. There might be less of a learning curve, very flexible. There's definitely some downsides. Being in the same ecosystem as your front end, back end code might not always necessarily be a positive thing, because you start to kind of blurry the lines between DevOps and I guess your day-to-day engineering, which may be good, may be bad. So I've only been playing around with this on little projects in the past few weeks, so I don't know the extent of its scalability, but yeah, again, very promising, and it looks like a great tool. So yeah, I hope this was useful. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.